In 2008, we introduced the short lift system of work, where scaffolds are erected in 1 metre lift heights. We're seeing this becoming very popular in industrial scaffolding applications and offshore, where effectively the scaffold is erected in 1 metre lifts, the handrails become the ledgers become the handrails, and so on. The scaffolder's step, introduced in 2005, has seen further developments from the original step. Originally, the HSE were concerned not about people climbing on the step as long as they were clipped on, but were more concerned about people jumping from the step onto the platform and the risk of board failure. We've seen innovations and improvements in these products with the introduction of short steps and step ladders. Again, alternatives to this with system scaffolding. Here we can see an example of a proprietary system scaffold using the console bracket or hop-up brackets on the inside, which were originally designed to be used on the outside of the scaffold or the inside to create an inside platform. And in this case, you can see that they've created a temporary platform in every other bay to put the handrails up in advance and linking the middle bays from either side. As with most legislation and most guidance notes, the last resort is the use of personal fall protection equipment, or PPE. In this case, we feature the 100% protected traverse as the opposite to the unprotected traverse, utilising double lanyards where a scaffolder can traverse from anchor point to anchor point, continuously attached. This system is greatly enhanced by the use of proprietary anchor devices that are specially designed to be fixed to the standards, rather than a conventional scaffolder's hook, which relies upon being clipped to the ledger below your feet. Other considerations in SG4: the use of temporary edge protection, pavement gantries, pavement lifts, floor height lifts, installed fall protection systems, protection fans, cantilevered structures, temporary roofs. Some of you will notice that are familiar with the 2005 version of SG4 that the title was extended to false work. We still include false work, even though we've dropped the name from the title. There's still a section on false work and form work within the main SG4 guidance. We now include hoist towers, debris chutes, and birdcage scaffolds are extensively covered, and we've seen now the withdrawal of SG23, the specific guidance for birdcage scaffolds, as it's now comprehensively covered within SG4. Also, loading towers reflects the changes in our industry brought about by modern methods of construction, where more and more scaffolding contractors are being required to erect standalone loading towers that aren't abutted to an independent or perimeter scaffold. So consideration has to be made for erecting, altering and dismantling of these standalone loading towers, and again that's featured in SG4. So what steps are the HSE taking? Well, they required SG4 to be updated. The NASC had an undertaking that this would be done every 5 years, and we fulfilled that commitment in 2010. Field inspectors are asking principal contractors, what steps are you taking for collective protection with your scaffolding contractors? So scaffolding contractors and principal contractors that aren't using collective protection, I suggest that now's the time to consider adopting a collective method of working. HSE inspectors don't have to see your scaffolders working. They have very small windows of opportunity to actually see scaffolding operations, but we leave the telltale signs behind. If the HSE don't see the scaffolders' guardrails, the correctly supported working platforms with intermediate transoms, then it could mean the difference between whether the HSE decide to drive on your site or not. And the flip side to that, no transoms, no guardrails. It's plain for everyone to see that the scaffolding contractors haven't even attempted to comply with SG4. Moving on now to some other guidance notes. Let's start with SG19 Rescue that was revised last year. It follows the HSE and Health and Safety Laboratories research into suspension trauma, and it includes the current first aid treatment advice. It provides standard rescue plans for typical scaffolding operations that scaffolding contractors can choose from, rather than having long-winded rescue procedures included in method statements. And as I say, the conclusion of the HSE research was that there was no need to change the traditional first aid advice, and hence the revision of our guidance note. TG20, technical guidance number 20. Under the work at height regulations, it is a requirement that all scaffolds have strength and stability calculations, unless there's a note of general calculations covering structural arrangements contemplated, which in simple terms usually means a generic design. And a good example of that would be your bricklayer's loading bay. On a typical house building site, there might be 90 plots on that house building site, and each plot will be exactly the same in terms of the loading bay, and as long as the scaffolders comply with that design, no problem. Otherwise, the scaffold must be assembled in conformity with a generally recognised standard configuration. And as far as the HSE are concerned now, that is TG20 for tube and fitting scaffolds. A statement from Philip White in June last year: as from the 1st of January 2011, the Health and Safety Executive will no longer acknowledge BS 5973 as the recognised standard for the design of tube and fitting scaffold structures. TG20 is a technical guidance note, again available from the National Access and Scaffolding Confederation. It is a guide to good practice with tube and fitting, and it now comes in 2 volumes. Volume 1 includes basic scaffolds that can be erected without design in section 2, and volume 2 is further technical information for scaffolds outside of those covered in volume 1. SG27 is a long-awaited guidance note for traditional tube and fitting edge protection, and it helps comply with BSEN 13374 and addresses some of the issues surrounding the use of traditional tube and fitting that have been a bit of a grey area previously, and it now establishes a minimum performance standard for a number of typical edge protection applications in scaffolding equipment. Other revised or new guidance, safety guidance from the NASC. Last year we saw a new manual handling guidance. We've seen guidance on risk assessment, health surveillance, safety nets, which categorically states that safety nets should not be fixed to scaffolding unless the scaffolding has been designed for the purpose. Issues with substance abuse, consultation with the workforce, advice for employers on induction training, methods of access and egress, guidelines for timber frame construction, or scaffolds for timber frame construction, and in line with the HSE's initiative last year on working from vehicles, there's guidelines with some practical examples for the scaffolding industry. I note there that the guide for the management guides for slip, strips and falls, the most significant cause of accidents, the largest number of accidents caused in the scaffolding industry is actually strips and falls of scaffolders walking across other people's sites. Most people would perceive it to be falls from height or falling objects, but the most common cause of accidents in our industry is actually slips and trips at the same level. Other technical guidance, we saw the introduction in 2009 of the board standard BS 2482. TG20 requires you to use British Standard boards to that standard, and there's a further guidance note, TG5 and TG6, which looks at the care and maintenance of scaffold boards to that standard. There's other information about fire damage. Temporary roofs is a particularly good technical guidance which preempts what we're hoping to see in a European standard for the design of temporary roofs in the near future. Tying down of scaffold boards and the identification of EN fittings is also covered under new guidance. Training and competence. The construction industry scaffolders record scheme has long been established since the 1970s as the industry standard for scaffolder training. Some recent developments in the scissors scheme. The introduction in 2006 of the System Scaffold Product Training Scheme now means that scaffolders can have the System Scaffold Product Training endorsed on the back of their card. We've also seen last year the introduction of a new Scaffold Inspection Training Scheme, which for the first time creates an industry standard, a national standard for basic and advanced levels in scaffold inspection. That brings me to the end of my whistle-stop tour of all the recently updated NASC guidance. I'm happy to answer any questions.